Tonight on Addiction Talk, we're joined by author and former TV director Art Dielhenn. In the 1980s and 90s, Art was at the top of his game, directing iconic sitcoms like Diff'rent Strokes, Punky Brewster, Head of the Class, and Sister Sister. But behind the scenes, Art was fighting a private battle, his growing compulsion to drink. After white-knuckling sobriety for 15 years, Art entered a recovery program after hitting what he calls his rock bottom. Today, he's sober and using his voice to help others. He's the author of Get Out of Your Head, It's a Mess in There, and Addiction is a Family Disease. Art is pulling back the curtain on what addiction really looks like inside a family and how families can navigate this disease. If you have a loved one who's been impacted by addiction, you won't want to miss this. Join us as Art takes us through his powerful journey from the director's chair to a mission of recovery, redemption, and real change. Addiction Talk starts now. Welcome to Addiction Talk, and we are so happy to have you, Art, because first of all, we have watched your TV shows that you have directed, and it has been miraculous, some of the things that you've done in your career. And even as we were talking about this, we're all like, ooh, which one do you like the best? And so we have a poll on that. I'm going to ask Mike, Punky Brewster, Head of the Class, Webster, so many ones that you've done. It's hard to pick what people like the best. What do you have to say, Art? And then I'm going to let Mike weigh in as our co-host.
Okay, well, I think it's a toss-up between Punky Brewster and Sister Sister, but I'm gonna go all in. All my chips are in on Sister Sister.
Really? Okay, that's what you're gonna say. Okay, Mike, what's your thoughts?
You said Diff'rent Strokes, right, as well?
Yes.
Well, I didn't. I actually never directed Diff'rent Strokes.
Okay. Oh, I was going to say Diff'rent Strokes when I was in Australia. That was like, wow. That was like so huge. So I'm going to go Head of the Class for me.
Head of the Class. Oh, cool. Nobody's ever done that before.
You're telling me that you had the Diff'rent Strokes wrong? You were just part of it?
Yeah. I AD'd it a couple of times.
Oh.
We still count you in there, Art. We still count you in there.
Okay.
Assistant director is still great. So it's interesting. And so what did you say, Mike? What was your answer?
I really liked Head of the Class. It just resonated.
That one was good too.
Yeah. It was just, I don't know, because I don't know, for some reason when I was in Australia and I'd watch it, it really resonated with me. It was just really good. I liked it.
Well, it was a great show, and it was about smart kids, so it was written smart, and it was about smart kids, and I thought it had a lot of substance to it.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. It just really connected me, yeah.
It was challenging because there were 12 kids in the class, plus Howard, so, I mean, they would shoot that show about 10 minutes long, and we'd have to cut 10 minutes out of it. So the coverage-wise, it was just a very difficult show to shoot, but it was a smart show. I really enjoyed it.
I loved all of them. And if you ask me, I first said Webster because Webster, oh my gosh, he was so cute. It touched your heart. But then Sister Sister is like, it's even still playing these days. You still want to watch all the reruns. And, but ironically, our poll determined that it was between Punky Brewster and Webster, and Punky Brewster was the winner.
Wow.
Surprising?
Well, Punky was my first show, and it was, 4 8-year-olds, a dog, and an elderly man named George Gaines. And that was crazy. I mean, and I had a deal for 2 episodes, and if I could get through those, I could do the rest of the season. And somehow I managed to get through the first 2 episodes. I don't know how, but that was great. That was my first big shot in LA.
Well, you left a lasting impact. The fact that after all these years, all of us remembered those shows and have such a connection to them shows the power of what you put out into the world.
Well, she was an iconic character. She was like Annie. She was like, a woman in her own right, and she had her own opinions and her own style. Her dressing style became very popular. And Soleil Moonfry, who played her, was astounding. And the coolest thing about doing that show for me was the relationship I had with Soleil's mother. You know, we hear so much about how horrible stage parents can be, but Soleil's mother knew the business, and she and I talked every night. And if Soleil was having a problem, you know, she could tell me. And if Soleil was having a problem on the set, I could tell her. And it was sort of like in loco parentis. It felt really good. And all the other stage parents were great. And the kids, I mean, how can you beat 4 8-year-old kids who are all just having a good, and a dog, who are all just having a good time? You know, there was no grumbling on the set, you know. So it was fun.
I can imagine. And even to see them all grow up over the years, do you stay in contact with anyone?
You know, I haven't, but I was thinking about it this morning when I woke up. I said the Serenity Prayer first, and the next thought I had was, wouldn't it be fun to get together with all those kids again? So, you know, maybe I'll try to get together with Soleil and see if we can do that. I think it'd be fun.
So cool. And I think it's interesting that you went from, you know, being this A-list Hollywood director, actually, to now being an author that is writing about addiction and your own story. And we can't wait to jump into that, because everyone on our team who's read the book has been blown away by how real, raw, and how it's just touched them personally. Because most of the people who work with us at American Addiction Centers have some connection to addiction. And Mike, I'm curious, what were your thoughts just looking through some of the book as someone who's lived a lot of it?
What really, well, first of all, I love the book because it's so real and honest. But the thing that really stands out for me, because I'm in TV and film like you and stuff, is
right.
How did you get through the process of being, because I know what it's like to be on shows. You had to get those two to get, it's so difficult to even get a pilot picked up. You get 3 iconic shows, but you're using and you're trying to navigate that process with the studios and the network. How did you get through that day by day? Because I know when I was my active addiction shooting shows, I was out of my mind. It was so difficult. So how did you get through that and keep jobs?
Right. The truth is, my primary addiction is not substance. My primary addiction is behavioral. And that primary addiction is control. So my primary recovery program is Al-Anon. I was drinking all the way through, but control was more important to me. Control, so I controlled my drinking. I drank every day, but I controlled it. And every once in a while, it would be out of control, but I never missed work. I was always able to show up. I was a functioning alcoholic, but I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I didn't know I was an alcoholic until much later in the story. And I'll tell you that story when I finally discovered that I was an alcoholic. So again, my primary control and my primary program, I think at this point, even though I go to AA meetings all the time and actually secretary a couple, my primary program is Al-Anon, which is for people who want to control addiction in others. But not only did I try to control addiction as others, but I was also trying to control my own addiction.
Wow. I think that's really interesting, Art, because a lot of people don't realize how, you know, you've said in the book that you had many addictions. Many people just think about the alcohol or the drugs, but you talk about control. You talked about anger. You talked about sugar. You talked about all of these other things that kind of were, I guess, caused this spiral effect. Like they all ended up kind of leading to a perfect storm.
Well, it was honestly, yes. And ultimately it was alcohol. Because as most people know or don't know, I don't know, Mike, you would know more about this than I. addiction is a progressive disease, especially alcoholism and substances. So I was drinking for the first 30 years or 40 years, and then I stopped cold turkey on my own for 15, but my addiction didn't stop. My ability to process alcohol got worse over that 15 years. And then when I went out again and started drinking, I blacked out for the first time in my life. And I blacked out in a bar and ended up on a sidewalk at 4 a.m, drooling on the pavement. And that's when I knew that my alcoholism had progressed to the point where I could no longer control it. And it was at that point that I entered recovery. The next day, I walked into an AA meeting, and I've been there every day ever since.
So it wasn't until that moment, Art, that you really had this wake-up call because you felt like you were in control?
Out of control at that moment. Out of control.
Until that point, feeling like you could control.
Oh, yeah, of course. I was in charge of my own world. I was in charge. My ego said I could control everything. I'm a director, after all. Of course I can control, right? Like, it's like, and as addicts or people in addiction, we think we can manage it all.
I love how you said that you would drive for 15 years and you had that I sponsor me attitude, like you could do it all yourself and you're always in control, right?
Sure. My thinking's fine. I'm fine. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so that's such a powerful thing. Most people, like you say, behavior. Like, I'm not going to use again, but my behavior can be out of control. And I love how you talk about the other addictions, because I would go to meetings and there'd be people and they'd eat 32 donuts and they'd drink 10 cups of coffee. And they're like, well, I didn't drink today. And I'm like, yeah, but you're out of control of your mind. You're going to die of diabetes in the meeting.
Right.
So I love how you break it down like that. So when you then realize, all right, I can't control this, I've got to surrender to some kind of other process. Did you get a sponsor? What was the first step? Because this is important for people to understand, because you were a high bottom. You had, and you're like me, you're like, okay, I can work hard, play hard. Now I can't play anymore. What do? I can't sponsor myself, right? I got to look at these other addictions. So what's the first step? Because this is important for people to understand this.
Well, the first step, and the first step of the 12 steps, is to admit one's powerlessness. And it's the most important step of the 12 steps, in my humble opinion. Because before, I thought I had enough power to control everything, right? And once I blacked out, that was the moment. It was like, oh, in this moment of time, this sliver of time, I am powerless. And then I realized, I'm powerless over gravity, the apple hitting me from the apple tree. I'm powerless over water pressure when I was kayaking and did an Eskimo roll and broke 2 teeth. After a while, when I started realizing what life was about, I realized I'm powerless over my breathing. I'm powerless over whether I sleep. I'm powerless on whether I have to eat or, I'm powerless over everything. And that's when I said, okay, I have to turn this over to something different, something bigger than myself. And the moment I did that, I felt so much relief. I can't tell you. It was frightening at first, but then it was like total relief. It's like, wow, I don't have to be in charge of fixing the world anymore.
But Art, what you said was so powerful, because I think a lot of people struggle with that powerlessness, like you said, like realizing that. But the way you equated it to, like, hey, we don't control our breathing. We can do our best with our sleeping. There's so many things. Gravity, you can jump up and down as many times as you want. You're still going to land on the ground, right? No matter what you do. So I think I think that's what I love about your book, is your ability to break it down on a level that everyone can understand and relate to. And I think this is the kind of information that people need. Is that what kind of led you to write the book? Just help giving people the insight that you felt was missing?
Here's where it started. I'll try to make this not too long a story. I always had this title in my head about a book that I wanted to write, but knew I would never write. Okay. And the title was Get Out of Your Head. It's a Mess in There. The other title that was in my head rumbling around was Beer Isn't Just for Breakfast Anymore. And these two titles were in my head. And I kept telling people I was going to write the first book, which was Get Out of Your Head. It's a Mess in There. Oh, yeah, I'm writing this book. I'm going to write this book. And of course, I was BSing everybody, right? Then the pandemic came. And I realized that if I was going to spend the next year and a half or 2 years in my apartment alone, I was going to go insane. And I thought, what better time to write a book about thinking than right now? And in recovery, we have all these wonderful sayings and aphorisms and slogans that are these little memory bites, that keep us connected to the program. They're like, instant reminder bites. And I had been collecting those for 10 years. Well, at the time I wrote this book, I've been collecting them for like 6 years. I had 100 pages of them. And someday I'll do something with that. But I decided to pick the ones that were related to thinking and write, this first book, Get Out of Your Head. It's a Mess in There. But I didn't want it to be a recovery book. I wanted it to be for everybody because everybody was going through the pandemic. Then when I finished with that, the pandemic ended. I said, okay, now I've got to write. Now I want to write, not got to. Now that I've figured out how to write a book and get it published, I want to write the book I really want to write, which is about my recovery experience. And so I took all of those slogans that were specifically related to recovery, the slogans I really liked, and I wrote a book using those slogans. And sort of not halfway through, but as I was moving through the book, I realized, wow, this book is really more about the people who love addicts than it is about addicts. I'm going to have to describe what addiction is and show that. But then I need to talk about all those people, myself included, because I'm an Al-Anon. My father was an alcoholic. My brother was an addict. My father-in-law was an alcoholic. My son has had problems. Sadly, I lost him. But, I realized that addicts are talked about a lot, but the loved ones are not talked about that much, and they all suffer hugely. And that all came from the Al-Anon side of things, because I was also in Al-Anon, and I just realized that their brother and sister programmer, they're twin brothers actually. They were both developed in the same home, Bill and Lois Wilson's home. All the guys were in the living room doing an AA meeting, and Lois was in the kitchen with all the children and wives trying to help them survive their husband's alcoholisms. And, finally, Lois in the early 50s started Al-Anon for family members. And so I guess that's that for that. Did I answer your question? I can't even remember.
No, I think that's interesting because you never know how people get to the point of a book or how they decide to share their journey. And I know, as someone who was a storyteller or helping to bring stories to life on the film and TV, to be able to write that and share that, but it to be your own journey, I'm sure that was difficult because to tell your own story is not as easy as people think. And I wonder as if you were going through that and dealing with that process, if it was hard to do that because you're so used to, it's not make believe, but it's fiction, right? You're doing fiction, but now this is your story. This is your life. And this is your experience that you're using to change people's minds and to help them have understanding.
Thanks to the 12 steps and having gone through the 12 steps a couple of times before writing my first book, it was not difficult. This is like an extended I share, right? We learn how to share from the first person. We learn how to, in program, we learn how to share our story, so because it will help others and it helps ourselves get recovery, right, Mike? It's like, and the more we tell it and the more we clarify it, and more importantly, the more we talk about how we've recovered from the story, and that shifts over recovery. We're telling the story, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, but this is where I am in the recovery. This is how recovery helped me survive it. And then all of a sudden you're helping other people. So that by the time I wrote it, the big worry was the writing part. How do I make it so that it, not that it's simple, but it's digestible, so that it's really clear and so that it resonates with other people. Not just that it's my story or that it's information, but so that the reader has a visceral understanding of it and can respond emotionally to it. So that's really the writing part that's the jigsaw puzzle for me, not the part of my emotional investment in it. I had already worked my way through that.
One thing I love, Art, especially addiction is a family disease. When I do interventions and I try to explain to people, one person in recovery, the family is in recovery.
Yes.
And I love how you talk about that, because so many families are in denial.
Yes.
My family's in denial about it. I had to leave that environment. There's a stigma. They're like, oh, just get it together. Now, you came from people that were alcoholics. My grandparents were alcoholics and died of the disease. My parents, they've got their other, issues, mental health and stuff, but they'll never address that stuff. And I love that you did that. And here's a question for you. So did anyone else, I know you said that your father and different people were alcoholics. Did they seek help? Are they in recovery, or did they just stay on that path?
My father, no. My brother was dual diagnosis, meaning he had mental illness issues and addiction issues. And that's a whole different story. Well, it's not a different story, but it's a more extreme form of the story. And if you have or know somebody with dual diagnosis, tread lightly and be kind to yourself and seek help. My son, yes, sought recovery and was sober. My father-in-law, my wife at the time and I put him in recovery, and he stayed sober the rest of his life.
Amazing. So
go ahead. No, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say that, so for you, it was obviously more than physical. It had to be spiritual, right? Something had to shift in you to break the cycle.
Something shift. Okay. What was my bottom, in other words? My bottom was I had been sober for 15 years, dry drunk, right? And then my wife and I at the time separated, and I moved into an apartment, and I thought, or my little gremlin, my addiction gremlin on my shoulder said, "You're not really an alcoholic. You can drink a little bit. Go ahead," And so I decided to become a gourmet cook. And of course, gourmet cooks cook with wine, don't they? So I started buying wine, and cooking with wine. And there's a little bit left in the bottle. Why don't you try some of it? And so I have a little wine. And that went on for a couple of months, right? And then a friend of mine down the way had a little something to smoke. And he said, "You want to join me in this?" And I said, "Shh." And my addict said, "Why don't you? At least you're not drinking. Have a little, So I did. And 9 months later, it was Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or the day after Christmas. I can't remember. And I decided to go to a bar that I'd been to 100 times and had seltzer, people where I knew people, right? And I walked into that bar and I ordered a gin and tonic. I had no defense against that drink. I had not drunk a gin and tonic in 15 years. And I walked in and I ordered it and I drank it. And ordered another one and I drank it. I had no defense against that second drink. I didn't think twice about it. And 4 hours later, I woke up on the sidewalk drooling. And and a little man in a Santa hat walked by, peeled me off the sidewalk, dumped me in my truck and said, "Sleep it off, don't drive." So of course I drove. And I'd lost my glasses. And I drove home. I got into the garage somehow. I parked sideways. I staggered out of the car, took the elevator upstairs, sort of slammed my way through the door, and my son was still up. And he saw me drunk for the first time. And he said, I don't feel safe here. I'm going to mommy's. And he left me. And I was very proud of him for that, even then. And I've always been proud of him because he took care of himself. But the look in his eyes, that was my bottom. And I said, I've just lost the trust of my son. And it's time to get real recovery. And maybe that was spiritual. I think the spiritual part came to me later, but that was the bottom. That was the realization. That was that instant, that moment where I knew I was not in control and I recognized the damage I had done by not being in control.
You know what's so powerful about that, Art? And I want to break that down for you because many people think just because they stop drinking that they're working recovery, that they're in recovery. But the fact that you realize that you even call it dry drunk, I think that's so powerful. And that a lot of people think as long as I'm not drinking, I'm okay. I've conquered this. But for you to have that experience, what would you even say to people who think that they don't have to work a program, that they don't have to do the deeper work, that they can just stop drinking or stop doing the drug and everything's going to be fine?
Well, I'd say that addiction isn't about the substance or the behavior. Addiction is about the thinking about the substance or the behavior. So that's why I wrote this first book. It's all about our thinking. This is how we get ourselves in trouble, is in our thinking, in the stories we tell ourselves, as Mike mentioned, in denial, in the illusions and delusions we carry about ourselves, in, "Oh, I'm fine. For 15 years, I'm fine. I stopped drinking. I'm really proud of myself. But am I humble? No. Do I have any humility about it? No. Addiction is primarily a thinking problem. What did Bill Wilson say, Mike? Addiction is a disease, an allergy of the body, and an obsession of the mind.
Yeah.
The disease of the body you can address in one day. I quit drinking in one day. But the obsession of the mind lasts a lifetime. And there's so many other areas that need to be. First, you have to understand that you're powerless. Then you have to understand that your life has become unmanageable because you're trying to exert power over something over which you have no power over. if that makes any sense at all.
Mhm.
Okay, then you have to admit that you have to turn this over to anybody, the group, to, you know, the apple on your desk, to this. Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to this notepad, just so I don't have to be in charge of it. It doesn't matter what. Turn it over to something, and maybe that turning over process will lead to something greater, which in my case it did. Then you have to go through your life and examine why you're taking this substance or doing this behavior in the first place. You do a deep dive. Then after that deep dive, you look at your sort of developmental opportunities. Okay, I've seen now where I'm at fault, what's been going on. Now I need to develop some better habits. They're called character defects in recovery, but I'm sensitive and that hurts my feelings. So I like to talk about developmental opportunities. What can I do better? Then what about making amends? What about apologizing, really making amends to the people I've hurt? Then once all of that's done, I need to take inventory of myself on a daily basis. What is my thinking? Am I still thinking about doing that behavior? Did I wake up this morning wanting to have beer for breakfast? You know, what's going on today? Did I hurt somebody's feelings? Did I say something that hurt somebody? You know, it's an inventory. And then when all of this is done, what I found is that as I poured out the glass of wine, as I poured out the poison during this period of discovery and exploration and self-examination and new awareness, as I poured out the wine, something else filled my cup. And that was clear, cool spring water. And you can imagine that a person's body and emotional life and spirit would change if they were drinking poison or if they were drinking clear water. And I started drinking clear water. And all of a sudden I had, the work created a spiritual connection for me. And it gets to be my spiritual connection. It's only mine. It's not connected to anybody else. It's just of my own making. And then that's the first, I consider that the first half of the program. The second half of the program is, okay, what do I do with all of the stuff I've got to sustain my sobriety, to sustain my ability to not do these behaviors? Well, I got to help others. And in helping others, that's how I stay sober. So it's this process of changing my attitudes and my thinking and my spiritual life. And so that on a daily basis, I can stay fit and emotionally sober and of use to the world and myself and my family and everybody else.
I mean, you're so right, and grounded and regulated.
Grounded, and thank you. Yes, and grounded and regulated, and so drinking cool water. Yeah,
exactly.
Emotional sobriety.
Yeah, you connect to some kind of spirit, so you're not drinking the spirit. So I love.
That's
you talk
great.
About people, how they rescue, and I have to deal with a lot of people who are codependent and they're not caring. How do you do that now that you've got time in? Were you ever codependent, or how was that dynamic in your family with the disease that was going on? Because that's the biggest thing. I have to set boundaries. And when I work with people, I say, look, if you want to set a boundary, you say, these are empowering choices. We will work with this, but we have to eliminate that, and we have to set bottom lines. But especially when I do interventions, it's crazy. People are like, well, my son's, he's a good kid. And I'm like, well, he just ran up a $60,000 bill and he's smoking fentanyl in the garage. I mean, and he's 16. And the legal age to drink is 21. And we know with fentanyl, he doesn't have back surgery. What's going on? Yeah, but he's a good kid. Yeah. I'm not saying he's not a good kid, but the behavior is horrific.
Right.
Right. And then how is that codependency and rescuing and those bottom lines? How has it affected your life and your family dynamic?
Hugely, because I am codependent. And why am I codependent? I think when I go through all of as I've looked at this question, and I've looked at it a lot, I believe that I was codependent because I was afraid of being abandoned, because I was afraid of losing love. I was afraid of saying no. Okay, so much for that. But how did it manifest itself? Well, I couldn't say no. I couldn't. It was, and how does codependence show up? And this is what's covered in Al-Anon in dealing with an addict. Well, you may be enabling that addict. You may be secretly supporting their addiction. What are the other ways? You may be enabling, you may be compensating for them. You may be covering for them. You may be excusing them. You may be bailing them out. You may be paying their bills. The addict's behavior is toxic, and everybody has to adjust to the survival in the family system. So you may have to, in my father's case, he had a horrible temper. He was epileptic and drank, is that he was mercurial. So everybody was like, watch out, hide under the desk,
Mm-hmm.
Like you adapt to the circumstances in your family, and that adaptation and your reactions to it can become toxic to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like being in a family where somebody has COVID, and not isolating them, oh no, you have COVID, you come and eat off my spoon. It's fine. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh no, I don't want you to feel alone in your room. Come and give me a hug and a kiss. It's like, addiction's not rational. And if you try to apply rational logic to it, you're going to get lost. It's like a game. It's like rollerball. There's no time limit and no rules. And if you're coming at it with logic as a parent or a friend or a lover or a husband or a child, you're doomed to failure because you're not playing in the same ball game.
Well, Art, I think you said something, and I'm going to quote from the book, which I thought was really powerful. And I want to touch on that, but also because you said you can't come up with it with logic. How do you come at it? Because I think a lot of families like, well, what do I do? So maybe let me start there before I go back to the quote.
Let's do that.
But how, when I hear you say that as someone who loves someone who's gone through it, then I go, well, what do I do? You say I could be enabling, but I just feel like I'm trying to help them. I'm losing logic. I'm trying to think through this, but I don't know what to do. So what do you tell people? Do you feel?
Yeah. The Family and Friend Manual says, this is very important. The Friendly and Fam Manual that we've all lived by says, I will take a bullet for my family. I will take a bullet for my friend. I will save them. I will fix them. I will do whatever it takes to prove that I'm their friend. I would do anything for my brother. And I did. I supported him for a very long time. And then he would call me and he was so upset that I was doing well and he wasn't, that he'd get angry with me. And there I am supporting him. It was horrible. What was the question again?
Yeah. So the question was what do families do then if they can't use logic?
Sometimes the best thing to do sometimes the best thing to do is do nothing. Sometimes the best thing to do is to get well yourself. In other words, I had to do Al-Anon so that I could deal with my son's situation. And my son was dual diagnosis. And he lived with me for a while. And I was sure that I could cure him. I had not been talking to him for a long time. And he had blown up a couple rehab places, and my ex-wife couldn't deal with him anymore. And he moved in with me, and I was like so sure that I could help him. And 9 months later, I was in the hospital.
Yeah, I know you talk about that. Like you ended up thinking you were having a heart attack. You had a panic attack, and then that led to a trickle effect of health issues for you.
Yeah. And then I ended up in a psych ward because I was out of my mind trying to enforce the unenforceable rule. And the unenforceable rule is I can save my son. I have to save my son. And instead, trying to save my son drove me crazy. And I had to get squared away. And when I got out of the hospital, I changed. I stopped trying to fix him. I gave him the help I could, but I had to leave it to the universe to take care of him. And ultimately, he was conserved by the county of Los Angeles and ultimately lived in a facility. But I couldn't do it anymore. So, even professionals, and I think, Mike, you would agree with me, that the odds are stacked, are not always in the addict's favor or in the family's favor.
I mean, especially when you're talking about dual diagnosis. I have an older cousin who's bipolar and schizophrenic. And my auntie, when I was 18, wanted me to literally live with him. And I was in Perth, moving to Sydney to go to acting school. And I was the only one because my older brother, he went through a lot of mental health issues. My mother, very, mental health issues. My sister was, 13 weeks premature. So I was around insanity and no one was, well. And I was supposed to take care of my older brother. I said, I'm not taking care of him. I can't. I'm not his caretaker. And my cousin, and they offered me so much money as a young kid to take care of my older cousin. I said, I'm not doing it. They were very wealthy. I'm like, I can't take care of this guy. It's not my job. He's 10 years older than me. And then everyone got upset with me. And I was like, no, it's not no one took care of me. I got to take care of myself. I got to figure this out. So it is difficult. Like I do it all the time. I tell parents, look, this is the hardest thing, and you'll understand this. Yes. I've had to say to parents, the
hardest thing.
This is so hard. And I did an intervention with a young guy who's sober now, and I got him from Houston to LA, and he's like, I don't want to go to treatment. And I said, okay, I can't force you. I called the parents. I said, he'll be in jail within 24 hours. And within 24 hours, they caught him with a handgun and a lot of cocaine. And the parents said, what do I do? And I said, let him sit there. I'll go visit him.
Right.
Sat there for 3 weeks. We got him into rehab. He's sober now 6 years. And he said to me, the greatest thing you did is you just let me sit in my own reality, because they kept bailing him out. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It's the hardest thing to do, to have a child or a family member or a friend. But there's, like they say, and it's not cruel, when the plane's going down, oxygen mask first.
Yes.
We have to save ourselves, right? And I want to ask you this, how much to you is attraction over promotion? When you see someone that's in recovery and walking the talk and they're just powerful, how much to you does that affect you to go, that's what I want? So then when you're around a family member and they're not wanting to, you say, you know what? They're going to have to either follow my lead or I can't help them.
Attraction. It's attraction. And that's what I've found in my own life. If I'm sober, if I'm in recovery, if I'm walking the walk, if I'm honest, if I'm forthright, if I'm doing what I say I'm going to do, if I'm good at my word, if I'm doing what's right for me and for my life, then I'm an example. And other people see it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I've had people, not just in program, but in real life say, how are you doing this, or what, you know, you attract,
Mm-hmm.
you attract. And yeah, so I think it is attraction, not promotion.
And I think that's so powerful because Mike says that all the time. That is something he is constantly telling us that. And I think it is true because once people can see you living it, they know it's possible. And I think for a lot of people, when you're in the depth of despair, or even you're a family member, it's hard not to give up hope. It's hard to think, is this ever going to get any better? But then they come across someone like yourself, Art, or they come across someone like Mike, and they go, wow, it's possible for me.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite experience in recovery, and I get to see this often, is to see somebody take a 1-year cake, right? It's like 1 year, and you see this person that came in, beat up from the feet up, tore up from the floor up, crying, miserable, just a mess. And a year later, they're standing up, getting a 1-year cake and saying, my life is completely different. And I don't know what the hell happened, but thank you all for making it happen for me. Recovery is like this magical mystery tour, and it's a miracle. And to watch somebody with 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or 10 years, or my sponsor who's got 35 years of sobriety, it's a miracle.
Yeah, it's nothing better than we get it sometimes at the center, and someone will come in 3 days into a detox and literally losing their minds. And then I get them through 3 days, and then 30 days, they're like, hey, man. And I'm like, this can't be the same guy that was looking like he was peeing on himself. It's like, it's unbelievable. It's that, and it happens that quick. But I want to ask you a question. So when you got to LA and you were a director, you had to have a process and maybe mentors, correct? And then, it was the repetitions. Why do you think, like you said, this beautiful thing, after a year, people think, oh, I've done the work. Why do you think they can't I always say, to master a craft, you have to master the monotonous. It's simple, that it's difficult. I love your book because it's practical. You show up, you shut up, you do the work, you have a good attitude, right? Get right-sided, get around the right people. But then you get a year. So I've seen people with 20 years. I've got 19 years. They're like, I can wing it. No, it's work that has to end. I tell people, it's like, if you live on the East Coast like I did, you got to have picture. It's snowing every day, and you got to shovel snow.
Right.
Go out and shovel snow. Right. It's the reps, and it becomes that. You do the work. So, how does that, like, you go from that process? How do you remind people that it's a process every day? Nope, just go, keep doing the reps. How do you remind people?
Well, the most important thing I learned in recovery are the 3 words, keep coming back. That was the most important thing. Right? Is just keep coming back. If you don't learn anything else in recovery, learn those 3 words and say them every day. Keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back. Again, this is a thinking disease. Yeah. This is abnormal thinking. Mm-hmm. And to change thinking patterns takes time.
Yeah.
Rome wasn't built in a day, and the thinking that I had for 60 years isn't going to change overnight. Right?
Yeah.
And behavioral modification takes time. That's what recovery is behavioral modification, thinking, feeling, acting.
Yep.
Right? if I think one thing, it's going to affect me emotionally, and that emotional stimulant is going to make me act in a certain way. So my thinking has to change. My thinking goes, oh boy, it'd really be nice. I'm a little stressed. It'd be nice to have a beer. Emotionally, I think, oh yeah, boy, that'd be great. So I go buy a 6-pack and I drink a beer. Or as I did when I drank the gin and tonics when I walked into the bar, right? Oh, a gin and tonic sounds really good. We have forgetters as addicts. We have really profound, deeply rooted forgetters that forget all the time. It's like a defense mechanism against recovery and health. It's like, oh, I'm going to forget and I'm going to have a drink. No, I woke up hungover. I am not going to drink anymore. And by 4 p.m, my forgetter has already convinced me that it's time for a beer.
Yeah. Right?
This is, I don't know what this is, but it is. And so that's why in recovery we have recovery brothers and sisters. We have literature. We have phone calls. We have a million things in recovery that we do daily to remind ourselves to keep coming back. So when I wake up in the morning, I say the serenity prayer to myself. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay. My forgetter has been turned off, and I remember that I don't control the world, that there's some things I can do and some things I can't, and that I better be in the wisdom place when I'm making these decisions. And, and then I walk through the house and I see the 12 and 12 or Paths to Recovery, or I see the big book and I'm reminded, oh, I'm in recovery. This is cellular now. It's in my life. I never want to lose this, and then I go to a meeting. Or if I'm having trouble and I don't want to go to a meeting, then it's really time to go to a meeting.
Or did you say you go to a meeting every single day?
I go to a meeting virtually every single day, either Al-Anon or AA, or I go to a meeting, Sermon on the Mount, which was written by Emmett Fox, who was one of the contributors to the big book. Then I go to a 12-step all fellowship meeting, which is great because all fellowships come to that meeting. So we get to, instead of having AA and Al-Anon and OA and CA and NA and everything siloed in their own little silos and separate from each other, we can all talk about the 12 steps together and how we experience them in our various addictions. And I think that's a very important discussion to have. And it's one reason I wrote this book the way I did. I wanted AA and Al-Anon to be side by side. I don't say that in those words, but that's the underlying, because I really do think they're opposite sides of the same coin, and everybody in the family can get something from it.
Yeah.
And so when you think about, as we kind of wrap up here, Art, what do you hope when people read Addiction is a Family Disease, or even your other book, what do you hope they walk away with?
I hope they walk away with a better understanding of how thinking works and how addiction works. I think that would be, better understanding, because it's they're in books, they're information. I hope I touch them on some emotional level strongly enough, or gave them enough information to help them take whatever their next step is in their recovery, whether it's an addict or a loved one or somebody who's just obsessively thinking all the time, with that, constant loop of thinking that just goes, oh, if I had done that, this would have been different. If I hadn't done that, this would have been different, and that loop that just goes around and around and around and around and stops people from moving forward.
Do you see a third book?
Yes. I'm
You're already doing it?
I'm actually editing a third book now. It's with the editor, and I actually see a fourth book, which the third book is sort of not the same. It's going to be a mostly true memoir, and it's called "Don't You Dare Love Me," and it's and the fourth book, I'm thinking about taking that 100 pages of aphorisms and slogans and stuff and doing something with that. That might be a huge project, though. I don't know if I'll live that long. We'll see. But I'm having fun doing it. It's really, really great. And it keeps me in recovery. You know, if I'm writing about recovery, I'm in recovery every day. So it's like, it just keeps me in the process of feeling better, getting better, growing, and being able to be of service to others.
Yes. And I know we have people saying, thank you for helping families feel seen and giving a voice to something that is so hard for so many people to understand. And as you said, it is not logical. Addiction isn't logical. It isn't easy to understand, but we thank you, Art, for putting this book out into the world, these books out into the world, to help people, to help families, and to even help individuals learn more so that more people can get help and so that more people can find recovery and live joy in recovery, which you said, joy in recovery. It is possible, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's like I'm happier now than I've ever been in my life, honestly. And that sounds so weird. I mean, I'm almost 80 years old, and it's like I'm surprised by that. And I recently remarried, and life's grand. I'm having a great time, and I'm not in my head. I'm in recovery, and I'm doing lots of stuff. I've got a couple other jobs. I coach, do career coaching, and I manage an apartment building, and I write books, and it's just life's full. And it would only be this full if I had the sense to get into recovery and stay. That's the other word. Other than keep coming back, the other important word is stay. Just stay. And eventually it'll work itself out. Yeah.
Mike, do you have any final thoughts for Art?
Well, I was going to ask you about books, but I want to make a suggestion to Art, because you're 80 years old and the business has changed so much, and it's people go online. That's why I love your vulnerability. And when I started talking about my recovery many years ago, people got angry with me and said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Don't talk about that." And I'm like, "Wait, when I'm drinking and doing cocaine, you're calling me out and calling me an asshole. When I'm talking about my sobriety and celebrating, you're angry at me. Like, I'll do what I want." And now everyone talks about it. But what I would love to see from someone with you who's been in the business is to write a book, something like It's All Smoke and Mirrors. It's like all a lie, in the sense of, we know, right, that people look at it and they don't realize the work behind the scenes to get a show. And we're like, everyone's on YouTube. Everyone's trying to be famous on TikTok. Everyone's putting themselves out there for external validation.
Yes.
And destination disease.
Yes.
And people don't understand that when you arrive at the top of the mountain, you got to climb the next mountain. Right? It's work that has no end. And it's like, I would love to see someone with your experience. I'd love to throw you some ideas that just to be at 80 with all that experience. And I've got, I have a question. Did you ever go to Moore Park Street on Vineland and Moore Park?
That's where I started, in the treehouse on Moore Park.
The log cabin.
Yeah. One of my best friends was secretary over there. One of my sponsors, actually, sponsees. Okay. And I used to go over there all the time.
So when I moved to LA, I lived on Moore Park, and I didn't know there was a meeting down the street, and I would drive to Moore Park every day and get my morning meeting.
Exactly.
Yeah, we saw each other. And
we probably sat in the same meetings.
Yeah. Well, I probably drove by thinking, oh, those poor alcoholics, look at them on the sidewalks. I'm not an alcoholic, but
No,
clearly they
crazy
all are. They're
guys,
the meeting.
right?
Right. And
But
then
yeah,
10 years.
I'd love to see a book from someone with your experience. And I've got plenty of stories I could give you from other like experiences. Just because the industry is such a lie and people are stuck now with AI and that, but it's a process. So don't
Yeah.
get caught up in the hoopla. And because you're so honest and 80 years old, it just would be, people would read it and they would like, oh, it's work. There's
He's
no
giving
white
you
light
more work, Art.
experience.
Another book. Might
Another
still
book.
call you after this, I'm convinced, and give you more.
Yes. Yeah. Mike, call me and let's write it together, brother.
I think it'd be great because we know, I mean, probably all the same people. And I just think different stories.
Yeah.
So they go, oh, it's not like I always say, they say God can move mountains, but you better bring the shovel.
You better bring the shovel. Yes.
Right. And I
Yeah.
love that process. It's like, do the work. So this has been amazing. So that's all I would say. I would just like throw some suggestions, write another book.
He's giving you new book ideas. I see a partnership here forming already.
Right.
But Art, this has truly just been a blessing. And thank you for the gift that you're giving to the world through sharing your personal story, your journey, and your insight that you've gained on this. So we will be looking to support you. And we thank you so much for coming on Addiction Talk.
Amazing.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun and it's been a joy talking to both of you. I appreciate it.
Bye, mate.